This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. This episode, we're going to try and get into something that I think we as humans are forever going to be searching the answers for, which is, why is it the way that we are? I know it is hella deep, but you know, we're always going on the deep end around here, and that's where I like to be. But I have been thinking a lot about personality recently and how we show up in this world and like who we are. And you know, if you think about it from a psychological lens, there are so many ways of looking at, you know, how is it that we come to be the way we are, and who is it and what is it that really shapes the essence of who we are as people. And, you know, I think it's something that, you know, the deeper you get into it, instead of finding more answers or landing on more conclusions, I feel like there's more questions, more things that need to be unearthed. So I'm not trying to answer that in this episode. To be honest, I'll probably leave you with more questions. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, questions are really good opportunities to open a door and kind of figure out, you know, where you'll go, where it'll take you, which sounds hella enriching, doesn't it? So thank you for tuning in and joining me on this ride, because I am sure we have all heard of the sentence, "I'm just like this." Either you say it or people around you say it. And, you know, I think on one end, you know, it sounds harmless. It sounds like, you know, self-confidence. Yes, we love that. We love that self-knowledge. But then also, I think if you really want to get deep with it, on the other end of the spectrum, it also could be maybe not a lie, but a powerful illusion that we tell ourselves. Because, you know, when you say, "I'm just like this," that sentence very much closes the door, right? Like, where are you going to go with that? You know, not very far, and you're not going anywhere anytime soon with that. And I think the vibes that this sentence gives is, this is fixed, this is natural, and this is me. So I feel like this episode is going to be a little bit of, let's just, you know, just humor me for the next 50 minutes. But what if that sentence wasn't self-knowledge or self-awareness, but what if it was a result of long time of conditioning finally kind of settling into something that feels grounded, that feels like the truth? And there's this particular line from Frantz Fanon that really jumps out whenever I'm having this internal monologue with myself. My brain is an interesting place. I promise you, sometimes it's not always this deep. Sometimes I'm just thinking about the fact, I love how this is what immediately comes to mind, but there was this one time in year 13 chemistry, we were doing our titrations. Why was that so difficult to say? And my friend and I, we were able to titrate the specific color of Harry Styles' eyes. And let me tell you, as peak One Direction is, it really just made our day. And now that I'm saying this out loud, it sounds really lame. But anyways, this is all to say that sometimes my brain is not a deep space. But anyways, when I think about this kōrero, I always come back to this particular line from Frantz Fanon, which is, "The colonized is elevated above his jungle status." And what I think Frantz is trying to say with that is identity is not just internal, right? It is shaped by so many things. but it's also shaped by the systems of power that define what is acceptable, what is human, what is desirable. And so I think, if we are hearing that sentence, I'm just like, XYZ, whatever it is, I think a really fair follow-up question to that is, well, then who taught you that version of yourself was the truest or most grounded one to become? Because again, there are so many thoughts and meditations and theories about where personality comes from. But personality doesn't emerge in a vacuum, right? It emerges in systems, hierarchies, cultures, media environments. And if we're keeping it real to 2026, we cannot deny the influence of the almighty algorithm and the internet world that we live in. So what I'm trying to say really is that personality is political. And that's something that I want to get into from the get-go, that personality is not just psychological, it is political, like everything in life, right? Like if we think about some personality traits, for example, let's think about confidence, assertiveness, independence. They are not neutral traits. They are traits that are rewarded within specific systems of power. And with these examples, I'm not trying to call out anyone specific. If you are listening to this and you're like, Amma, are you talking about me? No, these are just examples, okay? But let's think about it. A loud, assertive man, confident, leader. A loud, assertive woman, ooh, aggressive, difficult. A quiet white person, thoughtful. A quiet, racialized person, disengaged, lacking. And when I think about these particular personality traits, which is just very, you could easily say, well, yeah, that's just me. That is just who I am. I'm just like this. But when you think about these examples, you can see how, it is a little bit political. It makes me think when Sada Ahmed said, some bodies are allowed to take up more space. We're not just talking about physical. We're talking about emotional, social, expressive space. And this is something that I have absolutely noticed in my life. I am a Black Muslim woman, and I don't like to just reduce my identity to that. I am more than that too. Most importantly, I am a Mal, and being a Black woman, being a Muslim is part of the experience of being a Mal. But I have definitely noticed in my life the conclusions that people have made about my personality based on how I present and move in this world. And especially when I was younger, I really took that on. I don't think consciously, I never consciously made that link, but unconsciously I really took that on and really absorbed that to be, well, this is just who I am. And that is not the case at all. But it's definitely something that I have noticed in my life. And another thing that I've experienced as I've gotten older as well is that, yes, I am a loud person, I suppose. Especially the laugh. I could never, ever be that mysterious girl. Let me tell you now, that cackle, whew, it's not escaping me. But I think when it comes to me as a quote unquote leader, I am more on the quiet end. And I think it's just because, I don't know, I just like to give people room and space and just let things kind of form in a different way. I wouldn't say that I'm like loud or assertive. And I have definitely noticed that, louder people have then awarded that like personality trait of being more of a leader and more confident. And in my experience, if it's a man, boom, like the way that the authority is automatically been designated to them is a little bit crazy. So it's definitely something that I have observed in my life. And I'm sure if took a minute to think about how this shows up in your life, you will come up with your own examples that are unique and specific to your experience. So all of this has kind of got me thinking, when you think about your personality, I think the question we should be asking all of ourselves is, what parts of me are actually me, and what parts of me are responses to what was allowed? Because if you think about the world that we live in and the systems that we all engage with, there are certain communities, especially if you kind of exist at the margins of race or religion or gender or, there are so many things. Personality becomes some kind of a negotiation, right? It becomes a negotiation between authenticity and safety, and between expression and consequence. And whatever that negotiation is, whatever you settle on, that becomes who you are. So I kind of want to take it back, because I feel like the way that we engage with social media now is very different to, I'm a 90s kid. The internet was definitely there. Like I remember at high school, Facebook was becoming all the rage, but it didn't seem like it was seeped into our lives the way that it is now. And so I kind of want to take it back to, I suppose, quote unquote, traditional media. Because before TikTok, before Instagram, what did we have? We had TV, we had film, and we had news. And all of these things, yes, entertainment, but they were also like identity blueprints. And if you never saw people like you being, just human, essentially, like soft and complex and messy and loved, then you didn't just lack that representation, you lacked permission. And, there's this long-standing media theory, cultivation theory, that shows long-term exposure to media shapes how we understand reality. So if media repeatedly shows certain groups as dangerous, certain groups as invisible, certain groups as comedic relief, that doesn't shape how others see you. It shapes how you see yourself. And Audrey... the emphasis on that, I couldn't have said that any louder. But Audre Lorde writes, a master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And in this context specifically, media is one of those tools. Because even when you try to be yourself, whatever that looks like, whatever that means to you, you're often working within the limits of what you've seen as possible. So, again, that same question we could all ask ourselves is your personality yours, or is it the closest version of yourself that felt survivable within the stories that you were given? And again, like growing up, with all of these like marginalized identities in Aotearoa, it was hard. I didn't really see a lot of representation of blackness, of, being a Muslim woman. It was like very reduced, stereotypical stories, and not just like in TV, film, or news, like in books as well. And so, when that happens, like, yes, it also feeds into stereotypes. And boy, did, people make it clear and known to me that they believed in those stereotypes. But I, think I unconsciously absorbed that myself. And this is not to say like I never knew who I was growing up. I feel like the essence of Omao, she's always been there. She's gonna be there as well, but you cannot deny that there are so many forces that shape that essence and shape how that essence is impressed upon this world. And I think it's really important that we are aware of those shaping forces, because once we're aware of those forces, then we have the agency to be like, well, this is how I want it to shape me, and this is how much influence I want this to have on the essence of who I am. So if we're moving from traditional media to social media, which is really the heart of our lives, it seems like at the minute, it's time to talk about how the algorithm is shaping us, because it is more relevant, more immediate, more powerful, dare I say, than traditional media now, the way that it's just embedded into our day-to-day lives. But the thing about the algorithm is that it is so big, its influence can be seen and felt, but at the same time, she's sly, okay? She's invisible. And so it's really hard to really pinpoint how it's shaping you, because I think especially like growing up as a 90s kid and seeing the internet like really, like take over our lives, I suppose. I think when I think back to how I used to use the internet, it seemed like it was just a reflection. But now it's like actively shaping us. Which is insane that the internet has become, it's not just, reflecting you, it's actively shaping you. What research is backing that up? A 2024 study found that social media algorithms can rapidly increase exposure to misogynistic content, with one experiment showing a rise from 13% to 56% in just 5 days. That is less than a week, y'all. Just really think about how crazy that speed is, because with, in less than a week, your whole information environment can be completely transformed. And there's also research that shows that engaging with like the manosphere content, it doesn't just reflect beliefs, it can change behavior, language, and worldview over time. And the pipeline to, here's some content to, resulting in change in behavior and worldview and language is very subtle. That's what I was trying to say about the algorithm. She moving sly, she like a snake, because it doesn't start with extremism. You're on your phone, you're on your device, whatever, and it starts with, and you're scrolling through, and it starts with self-improvement videos. It starts with confidence advice. It starts with gym content. And then slowly but surely it shifts. And the research also backs this up. So research from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue shows that watching and liking even mild content, so mild content, let's go back to our self-improvement and gym content and confidence advice, mild content leads to increasingly extreme recommendations. And you could see how that could pull people towards misogynistic and incel communities. And it doesn't take that much as well. There's data that suggests that within 10 to 20 interactions, users can be pushed towards more radical content. And when you think about 10 to 20 interactions, that is a small number considering how much time we spend on our devices these days. Like, I don't know what the average screen time is, but say your average screen time is like 3 hours a day. And how small would that slice of the pie be of 10 to 20 interactions if the whole pie was 3 hours? I can imagine that would be a pretty small slice. So, it's really easy to say like, this type of content doesn't affect me, especially when you're thinking about the really extreme content. But baby girl, that's not how it works, because algorithms don't wait for you to become something. They actively nudge you into becoming it. And it's not just, I know that I've been using the whole manosphere as an example, but there are so many other examples as well. It is political. A study from earlier this year found that algorithmic feeds can actually shift users' political views, making them more aligned with the content they are showing. So, this is something that we need to be hella clear about. The internet is not a mirror. Maybe it used to be way back when, but it's not anymore. It is a machine of influence. And I think the part of it that's really, really unsettling is that you think you are choosing the content, but no, you do not. And what is happening more often is that the content is choosing who you become. And I think that's something that we need to keep it a buck about that, because the sooner that we are more real about that, the more that we can kind of reclaim our essence, and we can be more active participant in the worldview that we have and the lens in which we view this world. So, let's talk about, kind of lay down the law about what the algorithm does and how it works, but let's talk about how we respond. Because it's, we're not just a passive participant in this. We adapt, we learn what performs well, what gets engagement, what gets ignored. And so slowly but surely we start shaping ourselves accordingly. And I think this is where the whole self-branding, which is something that I've been seeing a lot on the internet recently. And I think this branding conversation used to be relevant to big time influencers. But I don't like the way that we use the internet now, and how much we use it now is not just a conversation that is relevant to influencers. I mean, I suppose we all, regardless of how much we post or how we use the internet, we've kind of formed our own sense of self-branding. And so, you become digestible, consistent, legible. And I think this, even if it's not something that you're aware of, now that internet is becoming a space where you kind of have to code switch, right? Because there's different platforms and different audiences and different expectations. And when there's that constant code switching, it's really easy to lose track of, which version of you is the survival part, the performance part, or the preference part. And I think that algorithm, this is where the push and the pull comes from, because there's a quiet kind of violence in that, because, there are only certain versions of you that are rewarded. And when you think about that, those are the versions of you that then survive. And you could see how by default that then becomes your personality or who you think you are. But it's, much deeper than that. I kind of want to get into why it's really important that we talk about this. Because everything that we've talked about so far, personality and media and algorithms, it can, I feel like, perhaps maybe you're thinking, this corridor is a little bit abstract, okay, Amal, the internet shapes us, sure. But I think when you think about this fact, with what's going on, because this moment that we're living in right now, it is not neutral. I feel like we are living in quote unquote unprecedented times. We're living in times where difference is constantly being debated. Identity is hyper visible. Misinformation just spreads like wildfire. There's so much happening in the world in terms of war. There's a cost of living crisis. People are being sorted and categorized and judged. We're living in a very strange time right now. I don't know about y'all, but like whenever I read the news, I'm like, whew, like it's heavy. It's heavy. There's a lot going on. And, the internet is not just reflecting that. I feel like it's really accelerating it, because the algorithm and platforms, they do not reward nuance. And that's exactly what we are needing, right? We do need that nuance to be able to understand each other and to understand what is going on in the world. But what the algorithm does reward is clarity and certainty, strong opinions, and emotionally charged content. And, what that does over time is that it starts to reshape how we think, and not only just how we think, how we believe and perceive ourselves to be. And this is a growing space in research, but research is showing that repeated exposure to polarized content, it doesn't just influence opinions, it reduces tolerance for ambiguity. And what that means is that we as a society are becoming less comfortable with complexity, contradiction, and uncertainty. And the reason why this matters for identity/personality is that real people are complex. We are contradictory. We are inconsistent, but the internet doesn't reward that. So, what happens over time is that you start simplifying yourself in the world. The world and you become easier to understand, easier to categorize, easier to consume. And this is, I think, the really key part here, and this is where it connects to power, because not everyone is simplified in the same way. What you'll notice is that marginalized people are often flattened into identities, expected to, represent entire communities, and are held to higher standards of clarity and correctness. So, you can see how your personality, your worldview starts to shift, and not necessarily because you want it to, but the environment demands it. There's a concept from Sada Ahmed about how diversity becomes something that institutions manage rather than something that they truly embrace. And, and then she talks about how being, included often comes with certain conditions, conditions like being legible, being non-threatening, being understandable to the dominant group. And that's exactly what I think is happening online, because the algorithm doesn't just reward content. If you really think about it, it rewards legibility. So if you are too complex, too contradictory, too culturally specific, you risk being misunderstood, ignored, or even attacked. And so what do you do then in that case? What's the safest thing to do in that case? Is adjust. And, this is the part where it might be getting a little bit uncomfortable, but, we keep it a buck around here. The internet is not just shaping what you believe, it's also shaping how safe you feel being yourself. And safety is everything, because when you don't feel safe, you self-monitor, you self-censor, you perform, and over time that performance becomes internalized. And let's just, I feel like the corridor is getting a bit abstract, so let's ground it with an example. So if we kind of circle back to the manosphere pipeline example that we were talking about online, just say that I am a young man who goes online and, I'm starting to watch gym content. Oh, yeah, that sounds me. I've been trying to grow my legs, get bigger biceps, starts watching productivity videos. Hell yeah, I need that, especially in this economy. Let me figure out how I can get ahead. Self-improvement advice. Oh yeah, I love that. Like, I need to learn how to love me better so I can show up better. So, none of these things are extreme. Nothing is alarming. But you know what? That sly algorithm is noticing some patterns. How much I'm engaging with this content, my watch time. And unlike the other content where I might just keep on scrolling, I'm watching this, and not even 2 times the speed. I'm fully here for this. The pauses, because, I'm really interested in this and I'm really sitting with this. And so slowly the algorithm will start introducing content that reframes experiences like women don't respect you. Society is against men. You need to take control. And so over time, this doesn't just shape what he believes. It shapes, how this young man might see women, how he sees himself, how he behaves in relationships. And over time, you can see how that will impact personality over time, becomes more suspicious, more defensive, more rigid. And that wasn't always him, but because that's what the environment rewarded. So let's just, take a step back from that, because it isn't just happening with gender. It's happening with race and religion and politics and identity, and different communities are being fed different realities. So, when we meet each other, we as society meet each other in the real world, we're not just bringing different opinions, we're bringing different shaped personalities. And I think that's why things are feeling so tense in the world right now, because it's not just disagreement. It's literally it's much deeper than that. It's like some kind of divergence happening, because we're literally being shaped into different kinds of people, and that has mad consequences. Like, I cannot even emphasize enough what these consequences are like, because it affects how we communicate, it affects how we trust, it affects how we relate and how we love, and affects what we think is normal. There's also something else happening here that I'd like to draw attention to, and it's subtle and it's quiet, but there's fatigue, because we are constantly navigating visibility and representation and performance, and it's exhausting. And exhaustion also changes personality too, because then you start to become less patient and more reactive and more withdrawn, and not because that's just who you are, because that's what the environment is doing to you. So, I really want to go back to what Fanon was saying, because he was talking about how systems of power don't just control people externally, they shape how people see themselves internally. And I think that's exactly what is happening here, because we are not just living in the world, we are being shaped by it in real time, which is absolutely insane. So when you ask yourself, like, why am I like this? I strongly believe that we have to zoom out, because, the answer is not going to be, this is just my personality. It might be, the answer to that might be, this is the environment that I've been shaped inside. And I just cannot emphasize enough the consequences of not being real about what's happening here. Because if we are not able to communicate with each other, if we're not able to trust, relate to each other, how are we as a society going to navigate the stuff that's happening right now? How are we to navigate our climate change emergency? How are we to navigate this cost of living crisis? How are we to navigate the wars that are going on right now? How are we to navigate the genocides that are happening right now? How are we able to navigate the corridor and the change that needs to happen when we think about how to honour Te Tiriti here in Aotearoa? It's just not possible with this happening. Like, these consequences are too large to ignore. And I think a key consequence is that there's when our personalities and our worldviews are being affected and shaped to the point that they are, there is no way to hold nuance and contradictions, because, you can, even among the same community. So let's, for example, just talk about the Muslim community. I feel comfortable talking about communities that I identify with. I'd feel a bit uncomfortable speaking for communities that I'm not involved with. If you apply the Western lens, we all be apparently moving through this world in the same way. And that is not true, because yes, we may have that shared identity of being Muslim, but there are so many identities that exist in the Muslim community, and it's not like we can isolate those. There's this intersectionality of that influences how we see this world. And so, even among the Muslim community, I'm not calling out any specific brother when I say this, but, there are brothers who think quite misogynistically, if that is a word, and don't understand where the sisters are coming from. Even something that seems so simple, there are so many different ways that people in the Muslim community will feel and think about that. And I don't think that is a bad thing. We just need to learn how to communicate and hold nuance and contradictions, and be able to see each other for our humanness all at the same time. But that's just not possible with how our personalities and worldviews are being shaped at the moment. For another example, if I think about the mahi that I've done in like the activist space, I think when I first kind of joined the activism world, I kind of naively thought that, we're all here for the same kaupapa, and there will be a big alignment in how we view the world, or because we're involved with this kaupapa, we're very well aware of how our systems of power uplift but keep certain communities down. But the more that I've done my activism work, that is like, sadly, that is not true. I've definitely worked with people who recreate the harms of the system in different ways, but when I first got into the space, I just naively thought that, if you've got into that level of awareness where you've wanted to join this kaupapa, that you've also, had similar level of thinking in other spaces, but that is not true. And again, humans are complex. We hold many different identities among us. And so we constantly need to be doing the work, and we constantly need to be asking ourselves these questions. And sorry, just to, maybe I'll circle back to my activism example to just, keep it real and to keep it more grounded. What I'm talking about specifically is Pākehā people who have like recreated the harms of whiteness. And when I say whiteness, I'm not talking about literally white people, but I'm talking about as a system of power, as a structure of power, have kind of recreated that, which I think when it first started happening, I was like, that's insane. But then the more that I thought about it, the more I was just like, actually, intersectionality, Amal, and that's why it's really important that we keep talking and also doing that internal reflection on all parts of our, personalities and our worldview, because it is complicated and it is layered in every sense and in every single way and in every setting. And the more that we're able to hold that complexity and that nuance and the many layers and the contradictions, I firmly believe the world would be a better place. And so I suppose the good question to kind of land on is, then how do we resist this? How do we push back on this? And I just want to keep it really real here. I'm not out here trying to preach, because I do not have all of the answers. I want to be realistic with this, because I do not hold all of the answers. And I very much want this to be like a community. If you have any tips and tricks on how we can push back on this, holla at me, okay? So anyways, the question kind of now becomes, well, what do we do with this? Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And so, and I don't think that the answer is as simple as just log off. And have you, just a side tangent, but have y'all noticed that, 2026 is the year that we're all going analog, which I think is awesome, which is refreshing. I do think we need to spend a bit more time offline. The world is out there and it's not just on our devices, but also at the same time, like, there is a reason that we do have our devices as well. And so it does play a role. And I don't think just logging off will solve things. But anyways, the internet is kind of embedded into our lives to the point where it's not really optional anymore. It is social, it is political, and it's where community happens. So I don't think the question is not how to escape it, but more how to move differently within it. And I'm not here to say that if you choose to opt out of social media, then you're doing it wrong. If that's what you need to do for you, then good. But what I'm trying to say is, what would have the most impact if we're trying to resist this? And I think we just cannot ignore that reality that, for everyone, that's not going to be the solution for everyone. So if that's the case, how can we move differently within it? And I think the very first thing that we could start off with is awareness, and not just in a wishy-washy, vague type of way, because definitely awareness is one of those things where it's easier to say, but then you think about how to actually apply this and what does it look like. It's really hard to do that because it's so vague. And so what I'm meaning is being aware in a very specific way. And start with noticing what kind of content are you being shown? What emotions does it bring up? And what versions of yourself does it encourage? Because, as you were saying earlier, the algorithm, she's snake, she moved just silently, quietly. And I think algorithms thrive on unconscious engagement. So, let's turn that into conscious engagement, y'all. The moment you become conscious, you are interrupting that loop. And so I think it's really important that you ask yourself or start noticing what kind of content you're being shown, what emotions does it bring up, especially if you notice that you are being moved. Why are you being moved so strongly? And to really get deep with that. And this doesn't just have to be like a solo experience. I mean, yes, you could have this conversation with yourself in your head. You could journal about it. You could talk about this with someone that you really trust. There are so many ways that you can go about this, noticing and exploring. But it's, being really intentional and specific about that awareness, because, the moment we become conscious, we really interrupt that loop. And once that loop is broken, it then becomes really hard for the algorithm to feed you content that, really shapes who you are and your worldview. The second tip that I have is friction. The internet is very much designed to be seamless and effortless and automatic. And so I think introducing some friction and resistance is, pausing before engaging, not clicking on everything that triggers you, and choosing not to participate in certain conversations. And it sounds like a really small thing, but it matters, because every interaction is data, and data shapes what the algorithm will do next, what is presented to you next. And it's just another way of kind of interrupting that loop. It sounds small, but it is really that deep, because every interaction is data. I think the third thing would be to reclaim that complexity. And so, allow yourself to be human, allow yourself to be inconsistent and contradictory and evolving, even if the internet and the algorithm doesn't reward it. Because one of the biggest consequences at the moment is nuance, and choosing nuance and choosing complexity is a form of resistance. I think another important element to this kōrero is intentional community. And I'm not just talking about audience and followers, like your online community. Like, think about spaces where you don't have to perform or explain or simplify yourself, because, I believe that identity cannot exist under constant observation. It needs like a container, it needs some safety and context and trust and privacy. And I think the most important thing is to be gentle with yourself, because, once you understand deeply that your personality has been shaped by systems, it is very easy to feel like nothing is real. But that's not true. It's not a moral failing. It's not an individual failing. And so I don't think, you need to make it a thing that your personality has been shaped. It's not a weakness, but I think there's it's a form of intelligence, being aware of the fact that your personality has been shaped by systems, and that intelligence, I think, is very powerful and gives agency back to you. And so what I'm trying to say with this episode is that you need to strip yourself to your essence, or to your pure version. But I think maybe what feels more empowering is kind of thinking about it from the point of, well, what parts of you do you want to keep, and what parts of yourself are you ready to question? And I might not have had those questions or that prompt consciously forefront of mind, but when I really started getting into decolonizing myself and understanding the impacts of our system, and like doing that work, and I'm, still doing that work. It's a lifelong thing. I think subconsciously I was asking myself that, and it's definitely made me realize how growing up, my personality, has been shaped by these systems, and it's been really awesome. Even if I didn't realize this is what I was doing consciously at the time, it has been really awesome and healing, being able to realize like what parts of me do I want to keep, and what parts of them am I ready to question. And when with that prompt, of course, you'll kind of realize the influence of the systems. It's also a really personal question as well, because, as I was saying earlier on in this episode, there are so many things that shape who we are, and not, yes, the systems, but also like our immediate environment, the people immediately around us, our childhood experiences, our identities. So, when you start really thinking about like what parts of you want to keep and what parts you're ready to question. Just a disclaimer and a heads up. Yes, it will get political and it will be about the systems, but it's also going to be so much more than that as well. So, as we get to the end of this episode, I just, want to say, like, if you hear that sentence like, oh, I'm just like this, or you hear other people say that, sometimes, okay, yes, you just are like that, but also like give yourself the opportunity to kind of explore why you're saying that, because more often than not, you are shaped by so many other things, and you're not just like this, even though it may seem like that. You're shaped by media and by algorithms, and you're always navigating power and adapting constantly. But within all of that noise, there's still space and, space to not to, find your true self, but space to question the systems that shaped you. And I think, that is where something new can begin, perhaps a new worldview, a new understanding of who you are as a person. And we need that, especially in this world where everything is so chaotic and there's so much happening, and there's a lot of friction between the systems and the people. And if we want to navigate what a new world is going to look like for all of us, then yeah, we need to be having real, hard, messy, vulnerable human conversations with each other. And so, yeah, I think finding that space to question the systems that shaped you, where it could be the beginning of something new, is so important. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns, and catch you for the next one.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.